So, hi everyone, welcome to the Nature Conservancy's Lunch and Learn. This quarter, we're doing a Lunch and Learn really directed toward a very important audience of those non-operating landowners, or those people who own land or co-own land and are interested in doing conservation. Many people own land and they don't farm it and they're renting it out to someone, and we know that there are people who are interested in conservation. So we really want to bridge that gap in between the landowners and the farmers, and create mechanisms to have conversations that will be able to advance conservation, both benefiting the farmer, the landowner, and the land. My name is Stephanie Singer, and I work for the Nature Conservancy, the ag team in Ohio in the Western Lake Erie Basin. So great to have everyone here today. We have two speakers. Both of them are farmer advocates for conservation, which is an amazing title. It's a group of 20 farmers right now, which that number will continue to grow. These farmers are people on farms who are doing conservation on their farm, and more importantly, not only doing conservation, but they're willing to talk to other farmers and even mentor other farmers through the sometimes complicated process of implementing some of those practices. I will put the website for the Farmer Advocates for Conservation in the chat. And just a little logistics about the meeting. If you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat, and at the end we'll have some time for questions. But I'd like to introduce both of our speakers today, and really it's going to be an interview style. We have Chris Lenhart and Matt Burkholder, and I'd like to give them both an opportunity to tell about themselves and their farm and why they're here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Matt Burkholder, and I'm glad to be here today. I farm in Allen County, Ohio. I farm 395 acres, and I work with 7 different landowners.
All right, yeah, my name is Chris Lenhart, and so we own a farm outside of Defiance, near St. Michael's Ridge, with my brothers and sisters, and we've had the farm in our family for a long time, extended family over 150 years. I also work as a professor at the University of Minnesota. That's probably good for now.
Okay, thanks to both of you. I'm going to go through some questions. I'm going to direct them to one or both of you, and then feel free to jump in. And if there's something that needs clarified from any of the people that are listening, you're welcome to, like I said, either put it in the chat or even come off mute, since we have a small group. And we're really happy to have both a landowner who doesn't farm, and then also a person who farms and who works with landowners here. So we're getting both of those perspectives. Okay, the first question is for Matt. Matt, as a farmer, how do you approach a landowner about doing conservation on their farm, on the farm that they own? And what has been your experience doing that?
I've had a pretty good experience working with the landowners that I farm for. This is my 12th year of continuous no-till and cover crops. And about 12 or 13 years ago, I met with each landowner that I work with, and I explained to them that I wanted to start utilizing no-till, planting cover crops, because my goal is to take care of their farm, as if it were my own. So I want to utilize no-till and cover crops to help prevent erosion, to help nutrients to cycle better, to help water infiltration, and just to take care of their land and be a blessing to the community. And it was pretty neat after I explained that to the landowners, and then we started those practices. A couple months later, I had one landowner contact me, and he said he had heard about those practices on the radio on his way to work, and so that was pretty neat.
Okay, great. Out of the 7 landowners that you work with, Matt, did you have any of them that were resistant to the idea, or that were kind of hesitant on the idea?
I had probably one that was hesitant because they just didn't know much about it, and they had probably gotten a misconception of regenerative ag, or maybe some challenges. And their misconception was from driving around the neighborhood and seeing what they thought was a failure. And they just didn't want me to have that or have a financial problem there. But today I'm still farming their land, and they're continuing to be open-minded and continue to watch what I'm doing.
Okay, great. Thanks for sharing that. So, throughout this 3-part series, and the first one, Chris talked a lot about edge of field practices and how he's implemented them on the farm. And for this one, we're really focusing, for this lunch and learn, we're really focusing on in-field soil health practices. So Matt, you already mentioned no-till and cover crops. And so can you talk a little bit about if you are a landowner or a farmer and you want to have this discussion about implementing a practice such as cover crops, a little bit of timing of those conversations because of the seeding and the seeding dates.
Sure. Like right now, we're at the end of August, and it's time to, if you're the farmer, it's time to purchase the cover crop seed, get all of that in line, because in the next maybe 2 weeks or so, we're going to start seeding our cover crops on some of our farms, whether that be with a drone, whether that be with an airplane, or with a highboy seeder. So as a farmer, I want to talk to the landowner and make sure that I am going to be renting the farm again next year. So that's a concern of mine. I just need to make sure I'm renting it before I go purchase the cover crop seed and get the application lined up.
Okay, and you did, one of the other things you talked about with me, Matt, was like the timing of getting those seeds and sometimes the unavailability. So I guess the earlier you have the conversation, the better.
Sure. Like everything else, just like purchasing corn, soybeans, or wheat seed, you don't purchase that in May, when you're getting ready to plant, you purchase it months in advance. So it's definitely good to have your seed ahead of time, because there sometimes can be a shortage.
Okay. The next question for you is another one for you, Matt. Can you talk about what House Bill 397 and how this might impact a conversation in between a farmer and a landowner about conservation?
Yes, if you're a landowner or farmer, I would encourage you to do a little bit of research and just be familiar with House Bill 397. In Ohio, that was passed, I don't know if it was a year or two ago, but if you don't have a written contract, in place, that needs to be taken care of before September 1st, or the farmer assumes, the right to farm your land the following year. I'm no lawyer, I'm no attorney, but that's my take on it. So I would encourage you to look that up, so the farmer can be prepared for the next growing season.
Okay, and just talking a little bit about leases. Do either of you, or I think Chris said he didn't, but Matt, do you have any written information in your leases about conservation practices?
I do not. It's just all been verbal, talking about what I wanted to do with soil health practices, and the landowners have been open-minded and encouraged that I wanted to do that on their farm.
Yeah. So that is one way to do it. Another way is to have it in the lease in between the landowner and the farmer. That way the landowner is understanding the investment that the farmer is putting into the land with the cover crop or other practices that they're doing. And there are lease templates that are available. I know OSU Extension has some templates that have some of this language in them that if you want to use it with, if you are a landowner and you're looking to include this in a lease with your farmer, there's language that you can use that can be cut and pasted into the lease. Chris or Matt, do either of you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so.
Okay. All right. So here's a question for both of you. We'll have Chris go first. Chris, so the question is, what are the
About
barriers
using
for,
the template?
well, the question was, what are the barriers for farmers and landowners to have the conservation? Yeah, Chris has got a bad connection. So yeah. What are the barriers for farmers and landowners to have this soil health conservation conversation? And Chris, do you want to go first? Because I know you had a unique experience with, or it was an experience that I use the wrong word. I don't think it's unique. I think it's a very common experience that you had with your family and with your farmer.
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think we've been doing conservation work on our farm for a long time. I mean, probably 30 years, you know, like buffers and things like that. And you know, it's pretty straightforward. You know, it's more the conversation with the agencies, things. And you know, we kind of, you know, made aware our interest in doing. Oh, you can't hear me?
You're cutting out. Matt, can you hear him? Or is it just me?
I can't hear him either.
Yeah. So
Oh,
Chris,
sorry.
if you can repeat it, we'll see if it gets any better.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can.
I'm gonna try to move. I'll try to move to a better, see if I can get a better signal from a different location
Okay.
here.
Well, while you're doing that, we'll let Matt answer the question, or for what are the barriers for having this conversation?
As I talk to farmers about, you know, utilizing these practices, a common question just keeps coming back. You know, they ask, how can I invest and do these practices on a farm that I do not own? And that's a very good question, you know. But I would encourage the landowners out there, if they've got a farmer that they like working with, and you know, if that farmer's open-minded to doing these practices, I would encourage them to, you know, get into a couple year or kind of a long-term lease, you know, because then the farmer's going to be more open to investing in some of these soil health practices on your farm. But even if you can't do that, going back to the farmer, when they ask that question, I would say, if you can afford to do the tillage, if you're going to do a tillage pass, why not take the money that you're going to spend on doing tillage and plant a cover crop before soybeans? You know, that's kind of a wash, you know, 2 or 3 tillage passes versus the cover crop seed and getting it planted is kind of a wash financially. So the farmer's not going to be out anything. But that's just my take on that. Some challenges that I've heard.
Okay, so just so I'm clear on what you said, if you are a landowner right now and you're renting your farm to someone who's tilling, and you are interested in having them move to no-till, as a landowner, you might be able to suggest to them skipping that tillage pass, and then the money they save on fuel, putting that money into cover crops. Would that be a correct statement?
Correct.
Right. Great, thanks. Okay, Chris, do we have you now? Are you willing to discuss some barriers that you faced as a landowner with your farmer?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
I can.
Seems better here. Yeah, you know, I think so. Said we've had well, been working in conservation practices on our farm for about 30 years, but mostly it was the edge of field things, and we did discuss those things with the renter too. You know, like that we were putting in buffers, those kind of things. In terms of in the field, you know, we I think just made it known about our interest in doing, you know, reduced tillage and things in the field itself, but weren't, you know, specifically asking, you know, the renter to do that. You know, I think some of the barriers are, well, we've changed renters. We had one for a really long time, and then recently it changed. So there's that. And then, you know, we co-own it. Like it's 4 of us, 3 of my brothers and sisters and I. And so, you know, some of the things you have to like decide by committee, and that takes some time. And, you know, most of us don't live near there. My brother lived nearby, and would communicate with the farmer more frequently. But so yeah, just and then we all work full time on other jobs, full time and then some. So like we don't have a lot of time to think about it, although we'd like, generally see more conservation work done in the field too. But they're, I think, doing a pretty good job with it. So we haven't wanted to, mess around with that. And if we have a good renter, I think the general feeling of a lot of landowners is that they're just happy to have a good renter, not sort of, mess with that by bothering them to, do additional things. I think that's part of the attitude, which is maybe a barrier. And then I think also just, knowledge of, soil conservation practices and things. I do that in my work, but my brothers and sisters don't, they have other professions, so they're not exactly sure what, to say to the farmer, I think, to what specifically to ask for. Like the thing that Matt just said, like I hadn't heard that. I mean, that sounds like a really good suggestion. Yeah, so I mean, I think those are some of the barriers.
Okay, so what I've heard you say so far is a barrier might be the length of the lease that Matt mentioned. Also, Chris, you mentioned a barrier being the landowners might have lack of knowledges of what those practices would be to talk about with their landowner. They might also have multiple landowners who were, having to take the time to change or agree. So it might just be easier to keep the status quo. If you are on here right now and you know another barrier that you want to kind of talk about, you're welcome to put it in the chat. But those are all very real and common barriers that landowners feel and experience. And so I think that what we want to do, and one of the things that we're interested in doing, is helping landowners overcome those barriers. So if you're a landowner who wants to learn about conservation, we'd like to help you. If you're a landowner who wants to get more tools to use in language with your farmer, something else that we can help you with. In our conversation right before this meeting started, Matt and Chris and I were talking, and Matt had a really great suggestion. And Matt, I'd love for you to share that.
Yes, like Stephanie said, some of the barriers could be the landowner. They want their farmer to start utilizing some of these conservation practices, but one, they might not know what some of those conservation practices are. And as a farmer advocate with the Nature Conservancy, I mean, I would be willing to meet with some landowners, or they come and visit our farm, and I could show what we are doing with no-till and planting cover crops, and then familiarize the owner with what we're doing. And then if they like that, I would be willing to meet with the farmer and landowner both, and we could talk about those practices just to help educate everyone.
Yeah, thanks. So I just put the Farmer Advocate for Conservation website in the chat, so there are 20 right now farmer advocates. Matt is a very active one of those farmer advocates. They are living in different counties in the area. And so basically, if you're a landowner here or a farmer and you're thinking, I'd really like to be able to breach this topic, and I don't know how to do it with my farmer or landowner, the farmer advocates are a tool for you to be able to use. And we just talked about it with Chris, is maybe even getting involved with his farmer as the farmer advocate could meet with both of them and talk about the practices and how it's not only benefiting the income of the farmer, but also the land that the landowner owns. Okay. One more question from me, and then we'll let the people who are participating ask some questions. So could either of you tell us about some success stories that you've had having this conversation with landowners and implementing conservation?
Chris, you want to go first?
Well, I think, in our farm, I think we've just, done some of the edge of the field practices, and at least talked about conservation practices in the field and more generally. We haven't talked to a bunch of other landowners in the area, but I think people can see a lot of the conservation work that's been going on in our farm. I think more generally, so I think that way it's been good for the area to see some of those practices.
Okay. My example was a couple months back, I had a landowner contact me, and they pretty much said, hey, we know where you live. We know the farms that you farm, and we would like to talk to you about renting our farm because of the regenerative ag practices that you are utilizing. So I was very humbled to get that phone call. And just last Wednesday, we got a cover crop planted on their farm and helped them plant a little pasture area. And so that's going well. They seem like a very nice couple and very good people to work with. So that was pretty humbling and pretty neat to get that phone call.
Oh yeah, so that's an exciting story that you're able to share with us, Matt. So I guess that is another message where we would definitely encourage landowners to take the steps with their current farmer to educate them about practices that they want them to do and have that conversation, and to provide the support that farmer might need to do if they're interested in working on soil health practices. But as an alternative option, if your farmer's not willing to do that is currently renting your farm, and that if this is important to you, which soil health not only builds a great ecosystem on your farm, but it's creating a healthy soil for the future of whoever is going to own that property in the future. I think we see that, and it's not happening yet, but I think that I've heard that the soil health in the future of farmland, and even selling it, is going to be attached to the price of that farmland, or has the potential to be attached to the price, making it obviously more valuable if it's healthy. So where I'm getting at is, if you have a farmer and you've already gone through the conversation with them and you've used a farmer advocate to try to get them to do it, another avenue could be giving them enough notice in the future, finding another farmer in your area that is doing these practices, and being able to contact them and ask them if they're interested in doing those practices on your farm. It's really up to the landowner on the steps that they want to take, but we're willing to support you in them if you have questions. So are there any questions from the people that are on this Zoom call right now, or comments? We still have a few minutes left in the meeting, and so I'd love to open it up.
I have a question for both. You had brought up the concept of different lease terms, or having talking between landowners and farmers about securing the land for longer than the next growing season. I'd like to hear from each one of you, from your perspectives, about would longer lease terms really be a strong motivator or benefit to either side? Would that be a nice solution potentially? And how do you feel about if someone were to offer that to you, or to offer that to somebody else?
Obviously I'm from the farmer perspective of it, but if we could have a 3 to 5 or even longer year lease, we could plan better for lime, or any drainage repairs that might need done, or investing in the cover crop seed, or some other additional practices that I'm doing. That would be very helpful to have a long-term lease.
Chris, were you able to hear the question? I think he's in and out. Well, thanks, Matt, for sharing from the farmer perspective.
Sure.
I get myself off mute. All right, do we have any other questions? Or comments? I know I'm looking at the list of people here and I know there's a few other farmers on the call. So if you have anything that you want to share from a farmer perspective as far as leases or your experience with dealing with your landowner, we are all ears on here to hear that. Okay, well, I don't see anyone coming off mute and I don't see any questions in the chat. So it's the last call for everyone before we end this session of our Lunch and Learn. Okay, well, we thank you so much for joining us over your lunch hour today. We will be with you again the last Wednesday of every month. We are having a Lunch and Learn this year. Next month's topic will once again be from the non-operating landowner perspective, but we'll really be talking about enhancing wildlife habitat on your farm. So thanks everyone for coming. We really appreciate it. We hope you have a wonderful day.